Hey guys, Stealth here. In this video I'm going to show you the deck that I used in the video that I put up yesterday. That is the one where I test drove the King Tiger. Now, this deck is the 21st Panzer Division, also known as Rommel's Circus. And the deck is purely set up around tanks and high mobility. That's the way that I have the deck set up, and it's not the only way that you can set up the deck. You can also make it a little bit more infantry heavy than I have it as such. But I decided to go full tanks. I want to be the metal spearhead of the team. And especially if you have an ally who's backing you up with a lot more infantry, that's when this deck really starts to shine. Anyway, let's get into it. For phase A, my mobility is important, and unfortunately I cannot get mobility and reconnaissance on the cheap. So I decided to go with a couple of spa troops with the Kubel transport. It's fast. But once these guys have disembarked from their vehicle, they're only 18 kph, so they're not going to be that fast. Now, if you want fast recon, you're going to have to go with an SPW 231, but the thing is that I can get two of my spa troops with the same price tag as one SPW 231. The reason that I have it in here is that if I want to be able to scout fast or do a fast armored push, then regardless if I pick the spa troop or the Aufklarer, they're never going to keep up. They are never going to be providing the line of sight that I need for my tanks. So if I want to do an attack like that, I'm going to bring one of these, the 231. If I have a little bit more of a static map or a situation where I might not want to go as aggressive, that's where you can get the Aufklarer. Now, the other units that I have in this deck, or at least in this recon tab, are all 231s. The reason is that the other recon vehicle that you can get is the 233. Now the 233 is basically a sort of very mobile tank. That's the way that I look at it. It doesn't have any armor, but the tank gun is just as good as most of the guns that you get on the tanks. Yes, they don't have the same AP. They do have a very nice 9 HE, but they are just not firing that fast. They only have 6 rounds a minute rate of fire. Whereas these guys, with their 20mm gun, yes, they have far less HE. Correction, they have the same amount of HE actually. But they fire way faster with that 20mm, and they have a 792mm to back it up. And what I want to do with these units is try to both scout and nail down infantry as they're crossing open terrain. And when they're doing that, I think that the autocannon on the 231, the 20mm, has a much better chance of actually suppressing them so that other units are capable of taking them out. As for AP, you lose 2 points considered to the 233. You have 6 AP there versus 4 AP on the 231. So I decided to go 231, high recon, or at least high optics, a bit of armor on it, nothing too stellar, and the 20mm gun. And that's really all you can get. It's all 231s or 233s in this deck. Again, focused around mobility. Infantry. That is when you can really push out this deck if you wanted to early game. Because you simply don't get a lot of infantry early game. I have the whole of 3 Panzer Grenadiers in phase A. That is the full extent of my infantry. And you could say, well, that's a bit low on infantry. Is that all you're going to go with? In my case, yes. Because I don't want to go into towns with this deck, considering that they simply can't do very well in it. Because if you go into a town, then there's a very high chance that you're going to run your tanks or your support vehicles right into the open arms of a bazooka. And the bazooka will wipe out any tank, including the King Tiger, despite the fact that it has a lot of armor. So I don't really intend to capture a lot of terrain. My intention is to capture some front line, considering that this deck is mostly there for conquest matches. I want to capture a front line. I want to have these guys set up ambushes in tree lines if they have to. Or just as pretty cheap picket units, which are splittable. And by that I mean that you get the Panzer Grenadier and you get the U304F. These are considered 2 separate units once the Panzer Grenadiers have offloaded from the unit. And then you can use the 304 itself to, let's say, suppress enemy infantry. or to use it as another unit that can push out the front line in a lightly guarded area. So that's why I only have 3 Panzer Grenadiers. In Phase B, I'm going to be more maneuverable. I don't have as much infantry, and the units that I do have are likely to be more defensive if I have, for example, some anti-tank units. So that's why I have the Pionierführer. These guys are there to boost firepower of more static units. They're not there to go on the offensive because they're only a 4-man squad. They are pretty easy to spot, and they just cannot keep up with the tanks anyway. So I might as well keep these guys passive. And considering they're only 15 points, they are really cheap to boost veterancy to units around them. In case in Phase B I decide to go on the offensive and take over a town, I now have 5 Panzer Grenadiers. Again, I'm not really expecting to take this deck into a town, because it just doesn't do very well there. But now I can if I wanted to. And yes, 5 Panzer Grenadiers is still very low, so I really wouldn't recommend trying to duke it out with, for example, the 3rd Armored Division, because you simply don't have the infantry. You simply don't have the numbers that they can throw at you. And finally, the MG42. This one I will set up in a position where it has a good line of sight, so that it can use its machine gun to do a whole lot of suppressive, and make sure that enemy infantry units cannot push up. Now, in some situations you can use these things right next to your tanks. They will be quite effective at suppressing enemy units. The range though is only 600 meters, so keep in mind that they don't have the same range as the 1200 meter guns on the tanks, but they can be used in such a role. They just are quite likely to die very, very soon, so I'd recommend you be careful in that role. Other picks that you have in this section are really not that much. You have the Pionierführer, which I already have. You have the Pioneers. These, compared to the Grenadiers, are more effective from what I've seen at pushing out enemy infantry units from a town. They don't carry as many machine guns, but they do carry more submachine guns. And these tend to be more effective at short-range fighting. So the Panzer Grenadiers are there for my, let's say, my ambushes, my longer-range standoff weaponry, and they also have the 149mm heat rounds. This is the Panzerfaust 60. These guys are capable of taking down tanks, whereas the Pioneers really can't. They only come with frag grenades. Then you can go for the Storm Pioneers. 6-man squad, no they do have a flamethrower, no machine guns, no real way of dealing with infantry at long range. I would only recommend you take these if you're going to expand your infantry deck, because they work well together with Panzer Grenadiers, but taking over a town with sheerly a group of Storm Pioneers, I don't see it. I don't think it's going to be very easy. And then you have another 50 Panzer Grenadiers just with a different transport. So these guys come in the Opel Blitz, which disappears considering it's unarmed, and the U304F, that's the one that I'd picked for my deck, stays, so it can also provide suppressive fire. Then, this is where the firepower comes into this deck, the tank section. I start out with, and this is one I did not have in the replay video that I put up earlier, this is the Befehl Panzer 35S. This is the command tank. Try to keep these guys alive because you only get one of them. That's the only command tank that you get in Phase A. You can go with another one, but then you'd have to rearrange the deck somehow, because the way that I have it set up, I couldn't really find any easier way of doing this thing. So I have the Command Panzer 35S, then I have a couple of standard 35Ss, and thanks to the fact that these guys are not led by a command unit, you do get 3 of them per card instead of just 1. Now, these things are pretty damn old. They don't really have a great gun on them. It's just 6 points of armor piercing. Their frontal armor, it's 7 points of AP. Their frontal armor is 6. The rate of fire is pretty low. Machine gun is not that good. Their range is only 1000. These guys are there to support infantry or to push through lightly defended flanks. these guys are not there to go one-on-one against enemy tanks. Because most of the enemy tanks that you're going to be meeting in Phase A will turn this thing into scrap heap very, very quickly. Don't go there. Don't be tempted to go into a one-on-one gunfight because you're likely to lose it. Now their accuracy is 5, so they do tend to be decently accurate. Make sure that you have one of those Befehl Panzers in the area, and you're going to be seeing a bit more accuracy from the Panzer 35S. So this is my Phase A units, and Phase A doesn't give me that much income anyway, it gives me 85 points. So if I don't start out with all of my tanks initially, I can at least bring in one every minute. Once we move into Phase B, you get a lot more tanks. And as you can see, there is no real way to get more tanks in Phase A that are of a higher quality, so I decided not to really invest in that. What you can get in Phase B is the Beute Sherman. It's just a Sherman that's been captured from the Allies. 75mm gun, 11 AP, 10 frontal armor. It's not really anything special, but this thing can put out quite a lot of damage in sufficient numbers. Just keep in mind that they are not that good at killing off enemy tanks. They simply don't have the firepower. Or at least, in my sense, not enough. So if you want to kill something and really be guaranteed that it has a good chance of hitting, use the Panzer 4G. This thing comes with 14 AP when compared to 11 AP. And the thing that you're sacrificing for that increase in gunpowder is mobility. No, actually I'm not wrong there. It is mobility. You are sacrificing a bit of mobility and a lot of armor. The way that I see it, you should have your Beute Shermans in Phase B in the front line. These things can take a beating with their 10 frontal armor. And no, they will not shake off any anti-tank round. Absolutely not. But they are decently capable of being shot at and surviving for a decent amount of time. In that time, you use your Panzer 4G to snipe out the heavily armored units. This requires some micromanagement. Make sure your Panzer 4G goes after higher value targets. Don't have the Panzer 4G firing at, for example, anti-tank guns or infantry groups, because you're wasting the firepower of this unit. You're wasting the 14 AP. The Shermans are perfectly capable of dealing with lightly armored threats. These guys are there to snipe out the higher value targets, because they have the firepower to do it, but they don't have the armor to take the hits. If you want to boost the effectiveness of these units, you can bring in a Befehl Panzer IV. When compared to the Panzer 4G, they're not that different. The Panzer 4H gets 2 points frontal armor more. It gets 1 point side armor and 1 point in rear armor. As for the gun, it's exactly the same. The mobility of the vehicle is exactly the same. It's just the difference of being a command tank. And this will make the tank more of a target for the enemy, at least if they're paying attention, because these are going to boost the accuracy. If you have one of these guys next to a Panzer 4G, you're going to find that they get very, very accurate. If you put them next to a Königstiger, you're going to find that these guys get extremely accurate. And I'm talking 70, sometimes 80% accuracy, depending on your target. Now, you do have quite a few other tanks that you can bring in Phase B. As you can see, they have 6 cards of the Panzer 4H, where you can get either 3 of them at veterancy, or 5 of them at, I don't know, trained or just fresh recruits. This is something that you can go for. The question is, what do you give up for it? Because you're going to be paying a little bit more, which means that you can bring in slightly under 1 tank per minute at your 120 point income. But I don't really want to give up the Panzer 4G, because I like those 2 stars that they have on them. You could argue, well, I want the Panzer 4G compared to the Panzer 4H. The Panzer 4G is slightly cheaper, so I can bring in a few other units to support it, or I want my Panzer 4H because it has more armor. This is very, very much down to individual preference. This is the way that I have the deck set up now because it worked for me previously, but I'll still be experimenting. I might, for example, say, well, I'm going to not take the command tank, the Befehl Panzer 4H, because it might be too much of a target, and I only get one card for one, or one unit for one card. So I might throw out this one, and instead go with a couple of Panzer 4Hs. It really depends. Anyway, this is the main weapon of this deck. Make sure your deck and your allied team, or your team as a whole, survives long enough for you to bring in these babies. The Königstiger. These are absolutely deadly. 88mm gun, 7 accuracy, and again, this is already a very accurate unit, but once boosted with a command unit, they become almost snipers. 19 frontal armor means that they are immune to most anti-tank guns from Phase A and Phase B. The enemy team, or the allies, if you were, just simply don't have the firepower to go through it. And you can see this in the replay that I put up yesterday, where the French deck that I was fighting just did not have any anti-tank guns that they could throw at this Königstiger that could actually kill it. So they were just trying to keep themselves alive. And the Königstiger was just sitting there with his buddy, by the way. I brought in 2 of them. One standard, or one at veteran, and one at, I don't know what this is called, elite maybe? Trained? I don't know. We're gonna have to come up with some designations for these stars. Let's call this one trained and this one elite. The elite Königstiger was very, very accurate. Got a lot of kills. And especially, for example, the M10, the tank destroyer, the Wolverine that the allies can put up, they got one shot very, very frequently by these things. That's how good they are. However, keep in mind that infantry can still wipe out this thing with one charge. They still only need one good shot from the bazooka to kill off your King Tiger. And it doesn't matter where that thing hits. If it hits on the frontal armor, if it hits on the side or the rear, it doesn't matter. They will still go down very, very easily. Make sure you do not drive this thing into a town, or you're going to be wasting 350 points. No, keep them out in the open. Use them as snipers. And keep in mind that while these things have decent armor at 19, or actually very good armor at 19, their rate of fire of 5 rounds a minute is a bit lacking. So if push comes to shove, they can be overwhelmed. Don't simply have 2 Königstigers out on the front line. Make sure you back them up with, for example, a couple of Fireflies, or some units from your support or anti-tank tabs. These guys can deal with the infantry. Again, as mentioned before, the Königstiger firing at infantry, yeah, that's a big waste. Because as you can see, the Königstiger only has 1 more HE power when compared to the 75mm gun. It is really not that good at dealing with enemy units such as infantry units or anti-tank guns. You really want to prioritize the vehicles for the Königstiger and leave everything else to your other units. Supports then. I have a lot of units in my support tab. Again, all units are there to support the tanks. That is the main thought. A fast command unit is very welcome in Phase A. This is the SBW-223. Very lightly armored, comes with 1 machine gun. It's very fast, which is nice. And these guys can be brought in at any given moment to boost the veterancy of units around them. So I could have these, for example, push up later in Phase B with a couple of Shermans. I could have them push up early in Phase A with a couple of Panzer 35s. I could potentially have them parked next to an anti-tank gun and just boost the effectiveness of the anti-tank gun that way. Next, I have the Sdkfz 250/9. This is another suppressive machine, or a suppressive autocannon unit. It's the same 20mm gun that we saw on the 231, but as you can see, the 250/9 is way cheaper. It's only 35 points versus 60 points on the 231. You're also going to be lacking some armor. The optics are low, but these things are there to suppress enemy infantry units and kill them off. so that my tanks can deal with actual threats. And not to mention that infantry isn't a threat, it's just that the infantry can be dealt with by vehicles such as these much more easily than they can be dealt with by the tanks. The Panzer IV-C, this is a unit that you get to deal with enemy infantry. The Panzer IV-C does not come with a fantastic anti-tank gun. It only has 6 AP and it only carries 20 rounds of AP ammunition. But this is where it really shines, killing off enemy infantry. 9 HE and carries 60 rounds, so you can keep these things pretty much firing indefinitely. And with that, you can very quickly go through enemy infantry. So the way that I see it, and the way that the units work together, say in Phase B, I have my Befehlspanzer, or correction, I have my Beute Shermans as frontliners. Then I have 1 or 2 Panzer IV-Gs mixed in to snipe high-value targets. All the while, their veterancy is being boosted by the Befehlspanzer IV. As that is going on, I might throw in a couple of these 250/9s to deal with enemy infantry, suppress them. As they're being suppressed and can no longer move, the Panzer IV-C comes in and kills them off. That's the way that I have this deck set up, at least theoretically. And it does work. This is a way that you can quickly deal with various different threats. So just don't make a wall of tanks and hope for the best. The SPW-232, another one of those autocannon units. I don't really get it for the autocannon, I get it for the command veterancy stars that it can provide. It's a leader unit, and as such, these things are fast and can keep up with my tanks. You could argue, well, you might have too many command units. Maybe. But keep in mind that my tanks are going to be spread out much more than infantry in a town ever will be. And as such, I need more units. So I also need those units to be mobile. And that's why I have the 232, the 223, the command tanks. The veterancy is important, because it just keeps these units firing and keeps them from panicking. Or at least they're not going to be panicking as easily. And this is going to boost the effectiveness of all units around. Then, the Opel Blitz munitions comes in Phase B when I really need it. So far, I have not brought in this unit because my units either haven't run out of ammunition or died by the point that they did run out of ammunition. They're nice to have. I wouldn't bring them in Phase A because virtually none of these units are going to be running out of ammunition in Phase A. It's just not very likely. Let's take the Panzer 35S, for example. If you have this unit firing constantly, which by alone is not too likely, it fires 264 rounds a minute and it only carries 2100 rounds, so in about 8 minutes you're through your ammunition supply. Well, fine. I'll withdraw the tank, wait 2 minutes and then bring in the Opel Blitz. That's all that I need. As for my autocannons, these guys tend to run out of ammunition a bit faster. Quite a bit faster. They have ammunition supply for about 5-minute consistent firing, and again, that is not that likely to happen. They're likely to get shot at by a tank and die, or they just get retreated in time so that they can be rearmed in Phase B. Don't bring these things in Phase A, because you might need all that ammo in Phase B and C. The unit that I have in Phase C is the Fubar. 150mm gun on this one. Compare that to the Panzer IV-C with a 75mm gun. The caliber increases twofold, but the HE value increases almost threefold. You're dealing with 25 HE here. This means that if these units fire at an infantry unit, the infantry unit will usually just cease to exist. They just get immediately killed off. Of course, the larger the squad, the more shots it needs, and the rate of fire on these things is pretty terrible at 3 rounds a minute. But half these things hit, and there's a very good chance that the enemy infantry unit dies. Of course, the rate of fire can be boosted slightly by a veterancy unit, or by a command unit. So the 232 here could be boosting the rate of fire on the Fubar. Another nice thing about the Fubar is 14 frontal armor. These are not some sort of one-trick ponies that deliver a massive amount of HE damage and then die very quickly due to an AT gun. Not at all. These things can take a beating and stay alive. Very nice unit. Other options that you have are the Slummin Vipers. These guys, again, work very well with the infantry, but I just don't have that much. I just don't have any infantry units worth mentioning in this deck. So I don't want to have the Slummin Viper. And that's all you can get. There are no other units in this deck that, or in this tab, that are really interesting to use. I used most of them. You could argue, well, you could go with, for example, more of these 250/9s because you have more, or you could go with maybe a few more command units. Maybe. But this way I have a really nice kit of various different weapon systems. And that's the way that I consider it, a toolkit. Can I deal with threats in various different phases? And if the answer is yes, then the unit joins my fight. Then for anti-tank, most of these anti-tank units are geared around phase A. And this really is the only section of my deck that is set up for defensive warfare. It is not there to push, because for pushing I have all of these other units in the tank section and the support section. Now these guys are here to make sure that I can live long enough with this deck to last to phase B and phase C. So that's why I have 6 50mm guns in phase A, 2 cards of 3. The Panzer Shreks are there to deal with vehicles that I might encounter inside a town anyway, or that I might be able to side shot as they're coming close to my units, or as they're coming close to the Panzer Shreks. Stealth is very good on these units, and that is something that you can use to ambush a tank as it comes close. Just have these units hold their fire, and when the tank gets into range, they unleash with their Panzer Shrek, and you will see one dead tank very, very quickly. Then in phase B, I bring in the Pak 43 88mm, again a long-range defensive gun. It is not there to go on the offensive. Its movement speed is limited to 8 kilometers. So it is really slow to move around. And it has some really nice stats for AP, 22 points. Means that in both phases B and C it can deal with virtually any tank. Especially once these things get the ability to side shot targets. So if an enemy tank moves with its side armor towards you, they will usually one-shot them. I only get 2 of them, and that's enough. Now you do have some other units. You have the UE630F Pak. It's an interesting unit. It's a sort of fast infantry vehicle killer. At least that's the way that I think this thing should be used. High rate of fire, 5 AP, so it's not that likely to deal with a lot of enemy armor that well. 2 frontal armor. So any tank is going to sight or is going to kill you off with 1 shot. They're only 35 points, but the combination of 5 AP and 12 rounds a minute rate of fire is what leads me to believe that these things are there to kill off all the half-tracks that, for example, the 3rd Armored could throw at you. Whereas your tanks might not have the rate of fire, these things do. But I don't really care about the half-tracks, because they're going to be facing my tanks in open conflict, not inside a town. See, if you were to go inside a town, if you were to set up this deck for more infantry use, then these things could come in very, very handy, because then you can deal with all those half-tracks right quick. But that's not the way that I have the deck set up, so I don't have those. Another mobile anti-tank unit that you can get is the S307, 75mm gun. It is okay for mobility. It's only 50 kph, which means that even my King Tigers are faster. Rate of fire is decent, 8 rounds a minute. Stealth is bad, which means that it is more difficult to conceal these things in tree lines. If you compare that to the stealth of my anti-tank guns, the Pak 3850, these things have medium stealth. So at least these guys can hide. And in phase B, you can also bring in the Martyr 1. Again, mobility is not what I need for my anti-tank units, because my anti-tank units are in here. These are the units that I need to keep both my mobility and to keep the enemy vehicles killed off. So I don't really need the Martyr 1 here. You can get either 4 Martyr 1s in phase B or 6 Martyr 1s in phase... 4 Martyr 1s in phase C. but in Phase C they get a Veteran C Star. Now anti-air, I don't really have a lot here, but air could be a really dangerous area for this deck. Especially once the King Tigers join the field, you're going to have to bring more anti-air. Because in that phase it becomes quite likely that they're going to start prioritizing your King Tiger simply by trying to do airstrikes. And if they do get the side armor, then there's a very good chance that this thing is going to start hurting. Now anti-air can also deal with enemy infantry. They are not fantastic at dealing with it, but they can definitely do so. So these guys, the 304 Flaks, can go up with my initial push of, let's say, a couple of those S-35 tanks and deal with enemy infantry in tandem with this one, the 233 and the 250. Then in Phase B, I get the Gepard. And no, this is not the same Gepard as we have in Wargame, it's just its very, very early predecessor. Again, mobility here is key. I don't want, for example, the Flak 36-37mm, because it simply doesn't have the capability of keeping up with my tank forces. So mobility is key here. That's why I picked the Gepard. Now the gun caliber of these things is only 20mm, so to boost that I have the Sdkfz 7. These guys have 37mm guns. Their range improves and their HE triples. Again, they're going to be more effective against aircraft. And then, as a bit of a breach with my protocol, in Phase C I have the Flak 41. These guys are very good at dealing with enemy aircraft. They are very accurate, can deal with enemy tanks if they have to. Speed is awful, but their range is so good. It's 1200 meters. And most of the time they will shoot an aircraft, and note that I say shoot, not shoot down. They will shoot an aircraft if it's entering your area of operations. So even if it's not going to be able to kill it off, you can at least damage it quite a lot. And as such, make sure that that aircraft is going to be out of action for a while and that your tanks can keep pushing. Moving on to artillery. Again, the Sdkfz 250, this is however the 7 variant. When compared to the 9 variant. It's the same vehicle, different weapon. As you can see, the 250/9 comes with the 20mm. These things come with Granatwerfer 34. They are mobile artillery units. I have these to suppress enemy infantry units and to put up smoke screens if I absolutely need to keep a tank alive or need to do a withdrawal or use it as an offensive smoke screen, so that I can use that line of sight blocker to then move my own units up. And since they are nice and fast, they can keep up with the rest of the deck. Next we have the Rijenwerfer. Gets its name from the Rij, which basically means line. The line setup of these tubes. They fire quite a few of these 80mm rockets, or grenades I think, so grenades. And this mortar has, I believe, it has the same range, but it has more suppressive value, because this thing only fires 10 rounds a minute. This thing also fires 10 rounds a minute, but it fires virtually all of those 10 rounds inside one salvo. So you can suppress a larger area much faster, and this definitely helps. And then in Phase C I have the Lorraine F, which is something that they captured on the French. It's there to deal heavy suppressive damage against infantry units or, for example, anti-tank guns. 27 HE over 1600 meter range means that it can keep up with the tanks with its chassis and not have to be on the front line at the same time. It has outranged my tanks, so it can stay behind my tanks quite safely. Other units that you can find in this section are the Vielfachwerfer. These are actual MLRS systems. They fire these BM-8R rockets. I haven't picked them because I think that in Phase A I'm not going to be dealing with positions that are too much entrenched, and my tanks in Phase A aren't that good at pushing anyway. I only get these Panzer 35S's, which means that I'm going to have to wait for Phase B to actually go on the offensive. So the Vielfachwerfer, I just decided not to bring it. In Phase B, you can also decide to go with the Lorraine. This is the one that I just mentioned, but you get 2 of them in Phase C and 1 of them in Phase B. You also get the PZH, which I think stands for Panzerhaubitze 39F, correction 39H. This is a unit costing you 150 points, and as such it disqualified itself, because I think it's too expensive. I want to keep my points available for my tanks. I don't want to have to sink 150 points into a unit that is going to be doing damage from the rear line, because I want to have those units on the front line. I am the spearhead of the deck, or of the team, and as such this one just doesn't really fit the bill. You also get the Wurfrahmen 35H. It's a very old tank, which is armed with 280mm Sprenggranaten. Again, very large scale MLRS. Range 1300 meters, area of effect 104 meters. This is your large area suppression weapon. I just decided not to pick these because I wanted to try out the Lorraine. I might still switch them around later. And then you have the Panzer, I'm really not sure what this is, Beobachten Panzer. It's an artillery observer, and as such it has to be quite close to the front line, because the range on these things requires line of sight, or at least pretty close presence. And in Phase C I don't have the time to micromanage one of these. I'm micromanaging my King Tigers, so I decided not to bring them in this phase, because they're not going to really get the attention that they deserve. And yes, the 173mm battery would be a very nice asset to have. They would be really nice in suppressing large-scale offensives, or just suppressing areas so that my tanks can then sweep up and kill off the survivors. But the problem is the micromanagement. I just don't want to be bogged down with these things. Then finally my air tab. I start out with a couple of Storches. Very slow reconnaissance aircraft. I have 2 of these, and these allow me to use either a bit of extra optics in Phase A, B or C, or to spot pushes early. And especially later on in the game these things lose their effectiveness because AA tends to become more prevalent. So it's more difficult for these things to operate safely. But in Phase A you can see an offensive coming quite easily, and you know where to dedicate your forces. In Phase A I also have the Junkers 87D. This one, also known as the Stuka, comes in, delivers 4 50kg bombs, and is capable of suppressing enemy infantry and enemy anti-tank units. It is not fantastic at dealing with anything else. It is really not that good of a bomber against anything else but very lightly armored targets. Send these things out against the tank and the tank is just likely to shrug it off because they're only 50kg bombs. As for dogfighting, if you want to, you can use them as such, but I really wouldn't recommend it. I just use them as bombers, and I have them in Phase A, because in Phase A my infantry is so weak. So my infantry can need, or will need, all the help that it can get from a unit such as this Stuka. And then finally, the Focke-Wulf 190A8. This is my dedicated ASF. I have them already in Phase B, because in Phase B my deck starts to present more targets of opportunity for the enemy air force. And I want to have some weapon that can deal with it. Now you could go with one of them, which is going to be receiving 2 stars. The problem that I see with that is that if you have just one and it gets shot down, you lose your ASF. You lose most of your ability to shoot down enemy aircraft. If you have 2 of them, you will not guarantee, or you will not be guaranteed to actually kill off enemy aircraft, but you can at least respond to multiple incursions into your airspace. So you can deal with separate aircraft as they're coming in. Or you can have 2 of them chasing after one aerial unit if you want to. Now this is not the only Air Force units that you can get. You can get, let's see, Phase B, you can get the Focke-Wulf 190G3, comes with another couple of 50 kilogram bombs. I already have those on the Stuka. You have the Me-109G2. This one is a rocket pod plane. Very nice to deal with enemy infantry out in the open, but I already have plenty of solutions in the support tab. And as you can see, my support tab is way more slots than my Air Force ever will. And since this deck is mostly there to focus on ground units, I decided not to bring that one in this section. In Phase B you can also bring in the Ju-88, very large aircraft, worth 200 points. Hang on, 200 points, that's almost 2 tanks. I'd rather have 2 tanks than come in once with a Ju-88. Because a Ju-88 has no staying power, whereas 2 tanks have plenty of staying power and can dictate where that front line is going to go. The Ju-87G is a Stuka armed with anti-tank weaponry. It has only 12 points of armor piercing, and the thing is, I already have my armor piercing on other units, so I don't really need it on the Ju-87G. And then you can get in Phase B and Phase C more of these Ju-88s. You can get 3 of these cards in Phase C if you really wanted to, going for very large scale offensives. The Ju-88S that you see here is slightly different when compared to the Ju-88S on the left. As you can see, it's more expensive, and it comes equipped with 2 500 kilogram bombs, dealing 25 HE over a very large area of effect, versus the area of effect for the Ju-88S on the left, which carries 14 70 kilogram bombs, doing far less HE damage, but it just delivers more ordnance to a smaller area. And again, these things are very expensive, 240 points. I would rather invest those points into the tanks that I have over here. And that concludes the deck. This is the way that I have set it, or that I have it set up. So far I've played 1 game with it exactly, and it worked out rather well in that game. Especially if you live long enough to survive Phase A. That is really critical. This is not a rush deck for Phase A, or at least I don't think it will do very well there. In Phase B, this deck starts to warm up. In Phase C, the deck really shines. And that's where you can get a lot of firepower out of this thing. So make sure you survive to Phase C. And if you can, make sure that in Phase B, towards the end of it, let's say 3 minutes out from Phase C, you start saving your points. Because Königstigers at 350 points require about 3 minutes of saving your points. So make sure that you have enough to bring in one of those guys. And they will do an immense amount of damage for you. Now if you want to use this deck, the deck code is in the description down below, so you can import it for yourself, adjust it to your own desires, and then have a couple of games with it to see if it works. Let me know what you want to change about the deck in the comments. I'm open to suggestions and open to your thoughts on how to make this deck better or how to make sure it's more diverse. So let me know what you think about it down below in the comments. For now, end of the video, so thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon for more.